Hello, everyone. This is the KiwiRPG Week Visual Arts in Tabletop Role-Playing Games panel. It is the first panel of the week, and I think the first panel ever, I've just been told. I'm here with Tim Denee, Paul Tobin, and Stacy Longstreet, who I am going to let introduce themselves. We'll go from left to right. So if you want to start us off, Paul, telling us about yourself and what you're up to at the moment.
Sure, thanks, Tim. And hi, everyone. So just to keep it quick, my name's Paul Tobin. I'm a art director for Chaosium Games at the moment, which is obviously a pretty old school TTRPG company. They've been going for about 50 years now, actually, so it's one of the first. Before that, I was the creative director at a board game company that I helped found called Arcus Games. And then before that, I was at Weta Workshop for a very long time, working in films, predominantly films, as a concept artist and art director. So, and that's where I met Stacy. That was my handoff, Stacy.
That would gotcha. Very, very smoothly done. Thank you. My name is Stacy Longstreet, and I am currently working at PikPok, which is a video game company, and I am the publishing services director. Prior to that, I put in some years at Weta Workshop, as mentioned by Paul. That's where we met and had the privilege of working together a bit. I have also been at Wizards of the Coast, spent 6 years as the senior art director on Dungeons and Dragons, working on both 3.5 edition and then the launch of 4th edition. And somewhere along the way as well, I spent 6 years doing tabletop board games for children, developmental and educational board games for kids. So a lot of different experiences in gaming over the years. I have been playing tabletop role-playing games longer than I've been actually in the industry, and I continue to still play role-playing games to this day. So Paul and I are also involved in an ongoing campaign.
Yep.
So
yeah, kia ora.
Tim.
Tim Denee. I'm a designer and game designer, graphic designer, occasional illustrator. I make games under olddog.games, or Old Dog Games. Olddog.games is the website. Olddog.games on Blue Sky. Did Deathmatch Island with Evil Hat, and more recently Blades 68, which is like a swinging 60s expansion to Blades in the Dark, and a couple other things as well. But that's probably what I'm most well known for. Yeah.
Cool. And I'm Matthew Wills. I make the webcomic Swords. I also made a card game called Swords Cut the Deck a few years ago. But generally speaking, I'm pretty new to TTRPGs, so I'll probably be the one with all the questions. Basically, this panel, we're going to talk about the role of art in TTRPGs, how to get into the industry, and also how to sort of explore styles and commit to, world building and that sort of thing that helps bring your RPG to life. So I guess we'll just jump straight in and we'll talk about what you guys think the role of art is in a TTRPG.
Tim, do you want to kick off? We'll go reverse order this time.
Okay. That's that snake draft.
There you go.
Yeah, the role of art in the TTRPG. I tend to think of that because I'm I do my own illustrations, and I have, I am an illustrator as well, but I guess I come more from like a graphic design and layout perspective. So I tend to think of, thinking of art like broadly, right? Like not just the pieces of art, but like the whole sort of visual presentation of the thing. And taken from that angle, I think you can't like separate the visual presentation from the thing itself. Like the apologies if the storm is too noisy. My cabin is creaking. The way things are presented are as much, people's experience of the thing is as much about how it's presented to them as the content of the words themselves. So for me, it's it's not just like you write the game and then there's a box that says art goes here and then you put in art at the end. It's like what are we trying to communicate and how are we going to communicate? And some of that will be through words, but some will be through layout and graphic design and illustration and art And so, yeah, I mean, I guess at a high level, to kind of summarize all that, like art and layout and visual design is like, to me, a core component of TTRPG design and of people's experience of the thing. And yeah, it's like fundamental. And if done well, you can save, it's the old picture paints 1,000 words or whatever thing. You can save so much like word count and space by communicating lots of ideas visually, and have a nicer looking product at the end that people love and enjoy more. So it's kind of just like win, win, win.
I think your point, Tim, is really valid. And I think, most people talk about art and immediately you do go to pictures. You go, oh, what world am I playing in? And what do the characters look like? And what do the weapons look like? And all the other art that people think about when they're playing a game. But the graphic design is just as important. And I'm glad you mentioned it. It's one of the things that I know we worked with early on with Dungeons and Dragons when it was still just in book form, predating the computer version of everything now, where, if you're playing a game, you can, tab things and have extra screens up and look at your spell list and find charts and things to know what different hit points are, whether you're the game master or whether you're the player. You need to have all those references at your fingertips. And if you don't have it on a computer now and you were playing just on paper, the way we started this whole industry, having a nice layout, having something that's easily indexed, finding charts that are very legible and easy to read quickly so that you don't slow down the rhythm of the gameplay was always something that we worked really hard to try and do as well. So yeah, I think the role of art in some ways is to immerse a player, whether you're the game master or a player, to immerse you in whatever world it is you're playing in. And I think that the visuals are part of what helps place you in those worlds.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think, it's quite a high level question. So I'll take a bit of a high level approach as well. It's definitely all of the things you guys have been talking about as well. I think if you want to get a little bit more specific, you could start to think about, often with role-playing game books, they have different books have different markets. A Dungeon Master's Guide is for DMs. It's not for players. And so the artwork in a DM's guide is potentially going to need to fulfill a different requirement to, say, the art that's in a player's guide. So just even thinking about it from those simple terms is actually quite a good way of thinking about the role of art in TTRPGs. In terms of, obviously, cover art is all about bringing people in and helping to establish that look and feel. It's that desire to grab it off the shelf and immediately want to get someone flicking through the book. But I think for me, the big part I sort of try to think about when thinking about art for TTRPGs is I'm often trying to think about how the art can serve the story and the mechanics of the game. For me, that's a really big thing. It's like, if there's a way that sometimes the artwork might need to be quite directed towards showing a particular mechanic, or character generation's a classic, or showing a whole bunch of cool equipment that your characters can have. And that might be its primary purpose. But a lot of the time it's about, and it's kind of more talking about what you guys have been touching on at a higher level, it's more talking about the opportunity of storytelling in those worlds and firing the player's imagination or the DM's imagination around that, getting them all fired up for it. And that's visual storytelling. So that's kind of a different approach to art, I guess, as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a good question to kick off with. It's just a big one.
Yeah. I guess talking about a sort of dungeon master versus a player, is there any sort of obvious difference between the kind of art you want to give a dungeon master versus a player? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I do know what you mean. Yeah, to some extent, I think. I mean, there's a blog post I was reading. I'll put it in the chat. called The Activation Energy of a Game, and it was all about the challenge of like games is there's so many and it takes so much energy to get these games, TTRPGs in particular, to the table. Like the challenge is not just to get people to buy the game and want to play it, but someone like the GM probably has to get excited enough to like put together a group and schedule it, and then you have to have all the scheduling issues, and then you actually have to get people there on time and actually play the damn thing. And there's even that moment where like everyone's just chatting and you have to move into the game proper, and all these things are like points of friction that require like energy to push through compared to say buying a video game and playing it. And so I tend to think of like artwork is a huge kind of source of that energy to activate the game, if you like, this activation energy, like getting people excited. So that's kind of how I tend to think about those things. So if I was thinking about like the kind of GM type person versus the player, I mean, you want to pitch art in both cases that gets them excited to play. But for the players, obviously, maybe it's more about the things they'll be doing in the game. Whereas for the GM, I mean, there's a bit of that as well. Like I think GMs often have the role of like pitching the game to potential players. So you also want to show them exciting things. But then I think you could be maybe a little bit more high concept with parts of the book that the players might not read necessarily.
Here, we're still up. There we go. Glitch. Sorry.
You're good?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think the obvious difference between the two is I think you're right. I think everything needs to be engaging. I think every image needs to want a player or a GM to be part of that world, to be part of that game, to want to go forward. But the obvious delineation, I think, between the two is if you're the game master or a dungeon master, the tools that you need visually are more encounter based. You're going to need, whether it's the maps and the location or the full floor plan of whatever you're exploring, whereas those aren't things you normally would share with the player. The player's got to find out those things piecemeal as they make their choices and go in which directions they go in. So I think some of the visuals are different tools, whereas the players need to know, examples of things that they are capable of doing, things they might consider doing in a certain circumstances, choices. Sometimes they're, visual puzzles, different things that a game master can share with the players to proceed the storyline. So I think the visuals artistically can be different between those two groups, just based on what the role of the player or the DM is going to be and what types of imagery they need to share back and forth with one another.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think it's very much the case. I think a lot of time, especially when commissioning artists' artwork, often the briefs will be quite specific to a specific outcome or requirement. And so a lot of the time I'm always thinking, it's like, is this a moment where the DM's going to flip open the book and show the players the illustration? And if that's the case, is it meant to be, is it something that's setting the scene? Is it like an opening establishing shot in a movie to showcase the harbor and the fantasy city that you're about to engage with? Or is it, what it often is, particularly with fantasy games, I think, is it the monster that you're about to encounter? And is that moment where the DM flips open the book and says, well, that's what you're up against. And obviously the cooler the artwork and the more engaging the artwork, maybe the more horrifying the artwork, the more you're going to potentially get some excitement or horror from your players. So I think a lot of it is about, I think as an artist, I think the trick is thinking about how your artwork is going to be received by the audience, whether it's a DM or the players or both. And then, of course, there's the secret aspect of what we do, which is really what a lot of it boils down to, which is marketing the product. Most of, so much of the heavy lifting that art is meant to do, and graphic design, 100%. I mean, I totally believe what Tim's saying in that I think it's a very holistic process. Graphic design, a really good TTRPG is holistic. It's got the typeface, the choice of typeface and graphic design, the art. It all comes together as a product identity. And I think a huge amount of lifting for art is marketing and helping to promote the TTRPG, because we're such a visually dominated society now. It's quite, people don't spend a lot of time reading as much as they did now. They tend to make decisions quite quickly. And so imagery helps with that, I think, or it can if you get it right.
Do you think quality or quantity is more important for marketing? Do you want more opportunities to show more stuff, or is it better to spend the time making something particularly provocative?
That's a really good question. Tim?
Oh, I think quality for sure. Like, I think there's just so much stuff out there, like on Blue Sky or whatever channels you're like promoting to. If the quality is kind of average, it doesn't matter how much you put out, people won't necessarily take notice. Whereas I've kind of found if I have like one good piece that can like hook people, and I can just use it again and again. I mean, it's diminishing returns. Like, of course, ideally have a few good pieces. But yeah, I definitely think I try to go into each like piece or layout or artwork and think, let's just put everything into this and try and have like one like great visual that I can show off in lots of places. And then hopefully I can replicate that a few times. But yeah, I try to focus more on making each piece the best it can be, rather than hitting a particular number or just making as many as possible.
Yeah. I think that it's always the challenge of one size doesn't always fit all. So to have one really beautiful, quality piece may not be able to do all that you want it to do in the marketing arena. But I don't think you need, 15 pieces either. So I think your answer is somewhere in between. I think you need a small quantity of high quality pieces to do the heavy lifting when it comes to marketing and promoting the world and sharing what it is you're selling with who you want to buy. It's like, know your audience and cater to them and make sure that they understand what it is you're offering them.
Yeah, I think the idea of a really strong single piece that can do as much of the heavy lifting as possible when you first launch the game is incredibly useful. One of the things we talked about a lot at Weta when we were talking about launching products and films, and my friend Larry who was another art director at Weta, he was a really massive fan of direct transmission. If you can just transmit, ideally, you just want to transmit your property directly into the brain of the person, your audience, with as little in between as possible. The problem at the moment, as Tim said, is there is so much noise. And so sometimes you can do yourself a disservice by launching too many images. Sometimes it's better to have, actually what we would do is you would test 2 or 3 quietly, see which is most effective, and then you would just throw in behind that one image really hard. Quite often like a cover image, or like with board games, we'd often be looking at the cover, the box cover, because then people relate that to the product, which means that when they see it and on Kickstarter or wherever, they're already starting to recognize it. But I do think the problem is that after a while, people get bored with it and sick of seeing that. And so you need to then come in behind it with a bunch of additional artwork that continues to sell I call it the promise of the premise. It's like it's everything that you want people to think and be inspired by your product. And that's why a lot of people spend an insane amount of time and money trying to get that one image right. The poster image kind of thing. We did 50 roughs for one board game cover. So it's, that's how important I think it is. So yeah,
Totally.
that's a really good question. Really good question.
I'd also say just on that, if you're like a solo person, that's also the benefit of sharing like WIPs, work in progress stuff on Blue Sky or wherever you are, Instagram, whatever. Because even if you have a small audience, you can see which of the work in progress stuff gets more engagement, and that can be a way to get outside yourself and to get an understanding of like what are people resonating with and what do they love. Because like I have my own favorites of my own work, but often it's not until I share it that something unexpected people might love that I didn't think was that amazing, or vice versa. And that can be a good way to kind of start to narrow in on what are your like amazing hero pieces.
Yeah.
Do you sort of feel like when you go to social and say get sort of the court of public opinion, do you sort of feel like GMs versus players should be more weighted because they're probably the most likely person to actually buy the product to put in front of their players? Do they sort of have more buying power in that regard? And should you then be marketing more towards them?
I mean, personally, it doesn't make much of a difference to me. I'm just happy for people to get excited. I actually think like it's a great sign, because you're right that like generally I think most of the people I see engaging online are in that kind of GM seat, and they're the ones who are like buying the games and organizing the games. But when I see in the comments like a person who's a player and then they tag in their GM and they're excited to share it with the GM because they want someone else to run this thing for them, I think that's like a really great sign that they're so invested that they're trying to convince their friend to, to do this thing for them.
I think what on that note, it's interesting from a business model. There's a lot less GMs than there are players. So
Numbers game.
It's a numbers game. So you release a DM book and you'll get, 1 in 5 buying it. If you release a player book, you might get 5, right? So it's kind of, I think it's interesting where, I think to Tim's point, you really just want to get people excited. But it's interesting that really you should be, in terms of trying to track whether your artwork is appealing to the audience and you're getting traction. I think it is probably just the general audience in general. The irony is that the bulk of those people, I guess it depends where you're putting that work out into, because some channels do seem to be kind of weighted towards DMs and GMs potentially, but my feeling is you want to get it seen by a wider range of people, ideally, and so sort of hitting those kind of areas where you're getting a good mix of people is really good, because that's obviously going to start to help give you that more of that and feedback on whether players, which are a larger number, are engaging with it. So yeah, it's hard. And I mean, how can art sort of make your product stand out from every other product? That's another whole big part of the puzzle, I think.
Do you think that the art style always has to be unique enough to sell something, or is there value in playing it safe and sort of doing what people will recognize?
Oh man, that's another good question.
That's a really good question.
It's a really good one.
The art style is always challenging, and there are, from a business standpoint and a marketing standpoint, it's trying to keep in mind who you think your target is from a gender standpoint, an age standpoint, a genre standpoint. There's so many levels to it, but I think that it's really important that you understand that there are certain decisions you can make that will reduce your audience, and there are certain decisions you can make that may broaden your audience. But art is always going to be subjective. That's a really interesting thing to understand and for people to wrap their head around is, one person's Mona Lisa is somebody else's Picasso. Not everybody likes the same style of art. You're not going to be able to please everybody. If you go with a style of art that you feel is kind of, you don't want to use the word generic. The word would be more universal, something that's been done over and over again. It's recognizable as this is high fantasy art and in this style that everyone recognizes. Yes, there's some safety there. But at the same point, again, if you want it to stand out, it has to do something different. And what that something is can be the art style, can be the name, can be a font, can be a color palette. There's so many different ways to try and mix and match. I would say there's not a good clear answer to that question, but I think it's important that regardless of the choices you make, you're considering each choice as to how it will affect the audience you think you want to play towards.
Yeah. I'm guessing a lot of people that get into this industry are into it. They're into it for the love of it. There's potentially less of a commercial drive, at least at the start. And I'd like to hope that the people creating a game, and I can speak for myself, generally I'm, as an artist and a game developer, I guess, I'm someone who is wanting to create something as interesting and original and as authentic as possible. And so that, for me, I'm trying to please, and usually I work with a small group of people. We're kind of trying to please ourselves first. And we're trying to lead with what we think is our strongest creative vision for the product. And that doesn't mean that I completely ignore market research. I do like the idea of trying to sort of get a sense of how the work we're producing is being received. But what I generally never do is look at the market and go, oh, I want to follow that trend, or I want to be aware of that stuff, but I don't want to be a slave to it, because usually what I've found, particularly in the film industry, is that the films that just follow the trends and are just trying to make a quick cash in are usually the worst kind of films to watch. And I think that's true of games as well. Whereas if someone's coming at it with a very strong creative sense, a real sort of quite driven from the kind of creative output of it and integrity of it, then I think you're in a far better place to be trying to leverage something that's going to sort of, people will understand that. I think people are pretty savvy these days. They can tell when someone's really putting their heart and soul into it versus kind of like a corporate grab. So I kind of like to think that that's an element of it. That means that you could just be following a style which is quite universal, but it's still really appropriate for your product. Probably the only final thing I would say, and I think this is true of film, most creative pursuits, in my opinion, is that if you can try to ring fence so that it has a very consistent style or look, because most of the things that grab my eye have got a really strong sense of identity, of style. So sometimes when I pick up an RPG book, it's got 30 different artists in it, and they've got this kind of smorgasbord of style. And I find that quite off-putting, because it just feels like a bit of a shotgun. Whereas if I pick up another TTRPG, Tim's is actually a really good example. It's got an incredibly sort of slick, coherent artistic vision. And that's because they've chosen to really sort of choose artists really carefully to fit within a particular style and vision. And I think that's, to me, as an art director, that's a really important thing to bring into your product, I guess, moving forward.
I think that's one of the biggest challenges with trying to produce a full book. I think, Paul, you can talk to this a little bit more as well with what you're working on. But it was definitely the challenges with the bigger RPG books for Wizards of the Coast, for Dungeons and Dragons, is when you're putting out a full book, the number of art pieces that you've got to put into that book, cover to cover, is too much for any one artist in the time frames and schedules that we're given. And so as an art director, the challenge is always trying to find which synergies between 3 or 4, 5 or 6, 8 or 9 different artists you can bring together and still have it feel cohesive without it just feeling like, as you said, Paul, a smorgasbord of art. It was part of why I enjoyed doing some of the modules, because they were always smaller, less pages, more focused on a specific adventure. You could get 1 or 2 artists to do the whole thing, and it did feel much more cohesive.
Yeah. I mean, Tim, you're definitely in that boat with your own games.
Yeah, I mean, when you're like a small creator and you're maybe making your own art or have a small art budget, I think kind of seeing that as a strength is a good thing. Like Stacy said, you don't have to manage 10 different artists, especially if you're making it yourself. You can just art direct yourself, and the whole thing will have some kind of cohesiveness probably by the end, just because you're the single mind doing it all. So that's like a strength. So you can kind of there's challenges to doing things at the small scale, but that's something to lean on as well. I mean, to answer the broader question, like I think in terms of originality versus what's expected and that kind of thing, I would say like again, thinking holistically about the visual design, you got the layout, you got the illustration, the different illustrations, and then kind of the art direction as a whole. I'm trying to conceptualize all those, and you don't have to be original across all of them, but maybe there should be some interest somewhere. So you could have like a really expected kind of illustration and art direction style, say the kind of middle of the road fantasy thing, but maybe the layout and like the typography is much more interesting and eye-grabbing, or vice versa. Maybe the layout is much more expected in like other RPG books, but the illustration and art style is something a bit different and unexpected. You don't have to be like unexpected and original in all aspects completely, but try and have something that kind of hooks people, and especially at that smaller end of the market where you've got no marketing budget and you're just trying to put a game out on itch and get it seen amongst tens of thousands of others. Like you are making it much harder for yourself if there's not something immediately visually kind of distinctive about it. So I think it's kind of worth exploring that, not just originality for the sake of originality, but it just makes your life so much easier if people glance at it and they see something that they go, oh, I haven't seen that kind of thing before. And I would say like so many game books do follow these conventions, so it's actually not that hard to find a new visual language that people haven't seen before, and it just makes your life a lot easier. Like for Deathmatch Island, people have said nice things about that in terms of visual design, and really it was just like I liked all these kind of like mid-century Swiss modern kind of graphic design styles, and I just hadn't seen an RPG book that used that design language. So I just thought, why don't I use that? And so that's like quite a simple thought. Like it's just a design language that was out there that's quite, there's lots of reference for it. It's not, I wasn't creating anything from scratch, but simply marrying this design language that I hadn't seen used for a game before to a game. Suddenly you have something that kind of stands out a little bit, and that can be like a selling point.
Paul, as an art director, do you sort of hire people in the sort of intention or hope, I guess, of getting them all to kind of gel and have a similar style? Or do you hire people on their separate merits and you want them to bring new ideas in?
Well, it's a little bit of everything, I think. I definitely target certain artists that have a certain strengths, I think, or I know play well together because of they just naturally, inherently sort of style well. But there are times when you're going to have to, potentially reach outside of your immediate network and hire in some new blood. And so that's always really hard because you look at someone's work online, but sometimes it might be a bit different to what you're expecting. So it is quite challenging, but I definitely try to work to as small a number of artists as I can. But I do like the idea that there is some variety. So I think that is one of the nice things. I think, again, it depends on the product, but I think some of the larger TTRPGs, it is quite nice to be flicking through and kind of get different flavors. It's not all the same, it's not all the same. Because that will get tired, your audience will get tired of that at some point, I think. If you're doing a lot of different books. And I think that's probably one of the differences between, say, a small indie RPG that might only release a couple of books and then that's it, it's done, versus, like some of the Chaosium or, Dungeons and Dragons, like there is a long serialization of books going on. And I think it is nice to be able to find new artists. The trick is usually I've got usually a directive that sort of says, we want to play within this style range for a given genre or book. And so it's very much trying to find artists within that. And then the other thing you've got to do is, and a big part of art direction is you've got to kind of educate the artist as to what you're wanting, which means providing them with a lot of reference. And I usually create like a document that's actually an art direction document that spells out the objectives of what we're trying to achieve creatively. a lot of reference, a lot of kind of like bringing them up to speed on the subject of the book and the context and the setting, because a lot of artists, especially freelance artists, you know, they've got to just work all the time as quickly as possible, I think. And so the more as an art director you can give them, take some of that heavy lifting and give kind of just about spoon feed them, I would say, the quicker and more better the results you'll probably get, because even a really great artist will sometimes miss the brief unless you really lay it out for them. And so if you want a better chance of getting a better result, you often want to kind of do a lot of the groundwork for them so that they can just sort of absorb it and then pick up and run. And of course, once you start working with them on the same property for more than 1 or 2 books, they just, you know, by that stage they're in the zone and you don't have to really tell them as much anymore.
Right.
But yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, I would add to that, having worked with many artists from around the world, freelance on different projects, the more you can give them visually, as you were saying, Paul, whether, you know, it's a Miro board or just as much visual aid to communicate the tone, the look and feel, the palette, the world, anything you can share visually is really important. Language becomes a bigger challenge, actually having to use words to describe what you want. While it's still important to communicate with words, you will find that the language barriers and the translations from Google are not always helpful.
Yeah.
And sometimes you can miss the mark on what you were trying to get just because the language barrier and the communication wasn't as clear in words as it can be in a picture.
I'd also just add, I've never commissioned artists, but I think all those tips are really useful for like solo creators as well, especially if you're making your own art. And that, you know, like I tend to think of wearing different hats, and you've got like your game designer hat and your writer hat and whatever else, your graphic designer hat, your artist hat. But I think like that art director hat is really useful for yourself. And I would really recommend, even if you're not commissioning anyone else, to make your own mood boards and to write up your own kind of like thematic statements and what the project is and isn't, and a brief for yourself about style. Because like after 8 months or a year, if you're working on a new piece, you probably forgot all that stuff from 12 months ago. And even when it's just you, it can become incoherent along the way because you kind of go down rabbit holes and you forget what the hell you're doing. So having like some touchstones to come back to, like, oh, this is the mood board of, this is what I'm trying to do with this project. This is kind of like some thematic sentences I wrote. Yeah, you really do yourself a favor if you set that up at the start, even just for yourself.
And it evolves too. I think that's the nice thing. If you're successful and you go on, you've got something from the start that you can then evolve and slowly focus more on the stuff that is working and build on that. But you've got a foundation to work on.
Yeah, totally.
I think you see a lot of products. I'm talking films as well and games. There's a lot of, if someone has a bit of a breakout success, sometimes there's a lot of retro engineering because they haven't done a lot of the foundational work just even at a basic level. And so sometimes you can really get caught out on that if you become really successful, because now all of a sudden you're starting to have to try to retro engineer a lot of stuff. And you can definitely do that pretty successfully. But it helps, I think, if you've kind of thought through at least some of that stuff earlier on. It's always a nice way to go. But yeah.
Do you think in terms of art style and quality versus quantity and all of those things we've already talked about, that digital distribution in terms of, you know, being able to release things as just a PDF or that sort of thing, does that change the workload or how you'd approach doing art for a game?
Interestingly, I don't really think so. I think that people want their content, whichever method they want their content, but they're still expecting that quality to be there. I guess if you're an artist and you're creating art that you know is not going to actually go into print and it doesn't have to be as high a resolution, there might be some shortcuts or less amount of work that has to go into it. But as an artist, I think you're always wanting to create in that higher resolution for yourself anyway. So I think that it's still a quality product regardless of how you're delivering it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say like that's actually sort of a trap, and maybe I don't know if we're gonna. We mentioned maybe like lessons learned the hard way, but a lesson I've learned the hard way is to like always keep print in mind, even from the start when you're working digitally, because it's a pain in the ass when you don't. And I've had experiences like even recently on Blade 68, I designed little faction business cards for all the factions. And I did actually design them like print DPI and everything, but I didn't put bleed on there because I wasn't intending to print them. And then we decided to print them. So I had to retroactively like add bleed to 58 different business card designs. It's a lot harder than you would think. And likewise, I've created artwork in Photoshop, and then the resolution wasn't up to the print specs that we later end up going with. So anyway, yeah, so I try to resist any shortcuts that digital might afford, and always design as though this is going to go to high resolution print at some point, just in case, because it saves a lot of headaches down the line. Even for book covers, like a lot of Evil Hats books are 6x9, which is 6x9 inches, which is relatively small, but I always do the cover designs now way bigger than that, just because if they get turned into convention like banners or posters or what have you, you don't want to have to recreate your art from scratch, because it's just a real annoying task.
Yeah.
There is definitely some traps. I'm on Pendragon at the moment, which is an Arthurian RPG that Chaosium produces, and I'm across Call of Cthulhu a little bit as well at the moment. And there's a really big distinction between the two, and it goes way beyond the subject material. It goes to the paper stock. And this was something that I wasn't expecting. And I got told fairly early on that Pendragon produces on an uncoated paper stock, which gives it kind of like a ye olde kind of feel, right? And it's a really nice stock for that purpose, but it has quite a strong effect on color and tonal quality. It's, so I now have to go into that every time I'm getting some artwork. I'm going into it thinking quite carefully around how dark can we really go with this image. Whereas if it's Call of Cthulhu, I don't have to worry because it's on a coated stock, which means you can go really dark, and the contrast tonal range will still punch out. So that's more of a problem for the art director, if I'm honest. But I make my artists really aware of it, because they have to understand that when they see it in the physical version, it's going to look a little different to what it looks on screen. So there is definitely that's not something I think that commonly turns up, but it is something that you have to bear in mind, I guess, depending on how it's being printed. Sometimes the old print on demand businesses often have a lower paper quality stock. It's not as good as a high quality stock. So sometimes you might have to take that into account so that the artwork, how the artwork reproduces. So it is a tricky one. I think these days, touching on Tim's point, I tend to work to the idea of the art of the reuse, which is if you've got a bunch of hero artwork, particularly if you're commissioning artwork that you think might become hero artwork, like a full page illustration or something like that, I'm quite cheeky. I'm already trying to work out how we can crop or come up with a composition that will crop to more of a landscape screen resolution, like HD format, so that it can work for like a vertical book, but also potentially work really well for banners or online screensavers or whatever. So I don't do that with every piece of artwork, but definitely like covers and those kind of hero pieces, I'll be thinking really carefully around how many different ways they might end up getting used for different purposes outside of just the game it's printed in. But yeah, that's a good one.
I think it's kind of remarkable, to Kelly's point about like the way digitization has affected other non-TTRPG book cover design and stuff. And I think there is a bit of that in TTRPGs, like in terms of thumbnails on screen. Like I try to make my titles as big as possible. So that's not a print consideration. That's like an online consideration. Also, I just like it. But also I think like there is something kind of special about this industry in that how strong like print is still a thing. Like obviously PDFs are really big now and everything's available in PDF. But when you look at crowdfunding, like you can see who's backed at what tier. Like people want the physical books, and there's
They
still
do.
so much like production quality in those books. I remember when I worked at a design studio like 15 years ago, an older designer was saying that like cookbooks were sort of the last like high print production books still out there. But I think like TTRPG books are up there as well in terms of like ribbons and foils and like nice paper stocks and stuff. So it's like cookbooks and RPG books are like the last two kind of bastions of like high production print.
Yeah. I actually really love how inventive some of the indie RPG scene has been around limitations. I mean, I think most of us in the creative industries understand that limitation actually breeds the potential for better creative success if you know how to take those limitations and work with them and kind of elevate them in some ways. And like just the whole, the paper quality is not going to be great, but maybe we just go black and white. We just have black and white illustrations, which look great on paper stock like that. Looks absolutely fine. You know, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, well that's a retro thing, right? And all of a sudden you're now tapping into that limitation has just now become tapping into a trend really, which was the kind of rise of old school TTRPG kind of games. I mean, Shadow Dark's a really good example, but there's a whole bunch of them at the moment. I think I've got Knave as well, and they're small. They're not big books either, so they're kind of leaning into the size thing as well. So there's an economics behind it. But again, they're kind of making the most of that limitation and kind of making it really cool and interesting. So yeah, there's a lot you can do in that space, I think.
Okay, we've got 10 minutes left, so I'm going to fold two topics into one. If you wouldn't mind each telling everyone a little bit about how you broke into the industry and one of the lessons you learned the hard way along the way.
Who's going? Tim?
I'll be happy to start.
Oh,
Yeah,
you
you go,
go,
Stacy.
Stacy. You go, say.
Oh yeah, I'll be happy to start. I like to tell this story because it was a very non-linear expectation of how I broke into this industry. I actually started in advertising as a production artist and graphic designer in advertising, and spent too many years in advertising, selling everything from luxury cars to fast food burgers. And at some point burned out and said, this isn't for me and this isn't where my passions lie. And I walked away from advertising. And I moved up from Los Angeles to Seattle, Washington in the United States, and took about a year off trying to figure out what I was going to do next. And I had been, aside from role-playing games, I also played, in addition to D&D, I also played Magic the Gathering. And that was about the time that Hasbro had bought Wizards of the Coast. And I had learned that they were based in Seattle, Washington. So I started thinking, hey, what could I do there? Because that would be fun. I've always had a passion for fantasy art and sci-fi art and gaming. Why not try and do something career-wise with that? And Wizards of the Coast indeed was looking for an art director at the time to head up their new pre-painted plastic miniatures line. And having been in advertising long enough to have been responsible for one or two Happy Meal toys, I had enough experience in my back pocket to be able to say, hey, I think I can take a 2D drawing and make it into a 3D object, no problem. And convinced them that I could as well. So I actually got in starting with miniatures on Dungeons and Dragons and Star Wars strategy games, and then moved up from there quickly doing senior art direction on the books, the RPG books, and licensing and many other things for Wizards of the Coast while I was there. And from there, it's pretty much where I cut my teeth on all of my lessons for art direction and working with artists around the world. And as far as lessons learned, I think that's really where I learned the majority of the things along the way. Most specifically, as I've already touched on, communication. Working with artists around the world is very challenging, and understanding the language barriers and the cultural barriers and all sorts of things. I think the biggest takeaway is you can.
Oh, Stacey's had a shocker. She's frozen and she's gone. She'll be back shortly, I'm sure. It's that
That was a
Wellington
good story. I
story.
really want to know about that McDonald's toy.
Yeah. Oh,
I
She's
did
back.
not mention what brand.
Sorry, you got cut off somewhere in the middle. I can't remember what you were saying.
I just finished with the pitfalls and trying to lessons learned. I had basically said it's all about communication, and the more information visually that you can share at any given time is really important. There've been the lessons you learn is when you send out a creative brief and the art that comes back misses the mark so badly that you have to go back and read your brief and figure out where you went wrong. And it's usually in translation between languages.
Tim.
Yeah. So I guess I don't know if I sort of broke into the industry as much as just started like releasing my own games. Like it,
Brute forced it.
you know what I mean? Yeah, brute forced it, exactly.
Same.
But I mean, I guess I could say like where I started taking it seriously was because I had been GMing for quite a while, and just because I have sort of a graphic design background and a cartography background, illustration background, I'd always gone to great lengths making maps and handouts and stuff for my own game. So I sort of shared those things online in a pretty haphazard kind of way. But I made some maps for Blades in the Dark and shared those on Google Plus as it was then. And John Harper was kind enough to suggest that I could sell those with a kind of royalty IP deal. And I'd never sold anything RPG related before then, but it seemed like a good opportunity. So I gave it a go and punted those up. I think they were like $10, $8, something like that. And they just sold really well. That's basically the story. Partly Blades in the Dark is a very successful game, but people seem to like those maps as well. And that kind of just kind of indicated to me that, like, you know, there's a lot of old sayings about the RPG industry, like the best way to make $1 million is to start with $10 million or whatever. And so I always kind of had the impression like there was no point sort of trying to sell things or make a go of it because there wasn't really an industry to speak of, which this kind of experience selling these maps, and they're like, you know, that top bracket on drive-through adamantium, whatever it's called, something silly like that. Anyway, they made enough money that I was like, there is kind of something here, and you can reach an audience, and it is possible to make something of a go of this. And so that experience kind of made me think, well, what if instead of releasing these maps for an existing game, I made my own game? And so then from there, it was like a process of having a little like banner, Old Dog Games, and releasing a small game, and then a slightly bigger game, and then a much bigger game gradually. And the latest thing, Blade 68, has done very well on backer kit. So, you know, I mean, it's getting somewhere. And I mean, in terms of lessons learned on the way, before I released those maps and before I started making very small games, I did have a couple of big games I wanted to make, these big Forged in the Dark ideas that I still want to get to, but I could never like bring it together. I got character sheets and like a few scraps of rule pages, but it just never cohered into this like single project. And I think that's quite common with Forged in the Dark games. Like people start them but don't finish them because there's a lot of parts to that system. But the other thing I'd say is that especially when you're like a sole creator, there is a lot to it, and it's a whole process, and you're doing it and you don't know if there's going to be an audience there. And so it's not surprising that it never came together for me. But the thing that kind of got me going, and my sort of way of breaking in, if you like, was, yeah, again, to start with the smallest game I could think of, which was like a 30-page Wes Anderson kind of Steve Zissou, Jacques Cousteau little game. And yeah, very intentionally, I was like, what's the smallest scope thing I can do? And let's just like try and finish something, even if it's very, very small. And I did that. And it sold very few copies, but it was kind of like a test run for me. Both, it's kind of like, I don't know, weightlifting or something. Like you want to start with something approachable and then work your way up to the huge Heartbreaker project. And so I really recommend that approach if you're sort of struggling to like release the things you want to release, just like strip it right back and start really small, and then get something just done, and then move on to something slightly bigger and just work your way up gradually. Because that way you're sort of learning a lot about the different parts of the process, and you're strengthening those muscles, if you like. And it's just a good way to like start to build that audience and things as well, because you don't want to spend years quietly working on this big project, but then you release it, but no one's heard of you because you've been like secluded away for 5 years. Whereas if you release something small and then something slightly bigger, you're kind of out there and people are coming across your work. And as you work towards the really big project, you're sort of building that visibility as well, which I think, so it's kind of win-win from that point of view.
I think my sort of entry into illustrating for RPGs was, I grew up on choose your own adventure books. They were called Fighting Fantasy, was the series I played back in the 80s. And I was so into it that I started writing my own ones. They were pretty terrible. And I started trying to illustrate my own ones as well. And then I'd write them with friends and we'd illustrate together and stuff. So, but they were terrible, obviously. But it was a way to start to understand, I guess, the fun of it, because I was obsessed with the art that went with these games. Once I started playing D&D, that was it. I was just totally hooked on it. And that kind of led me into fantasy and science fiction, and it led me into the into the film industry for a very long time. And quite a few of the people that were at Weta that I was working with were all gamers. Like, it was the first place I'd ever worked in my entire life where most of the people I was working with were like me. We weren't sort of like had stones thrown at us or anything, like for playing role-playing games like we were at college. So it's kind of like it was kind of like meeting a whole bunch of very like-minded people, which was amazing. And even though they were doing all of this film work, a lot of them were still somehow trying to find time to do some freelance illustration work on things like Dungeons and Dragons. And that's where half of them met Stacy, because Stacy ended up hiring half of them. So I was not that stronger artist at that stage. But I did start to help a friend of mine on a property called Earth Dawn. He picked up the license for it. And I started doing a little bit of artwork for him. And from there, over the years, what I've just sort of occasionally done a bit of RPG freelance illustration work for different companies. But I never was in the thick of it, because I was always, flat out making board games or films. And then it wasn't until quite recently that only about a year ago that I met the guys from Chaosium, and I was looking for a new full-time challenge. And it was just bizarre that now I've come full circle, and the kid that was playing their games at 17 at college I'm now getting that chance to work for that same company on the same product, Call of Cthulhu, which is kind of crazy. So it's been quite it wasn't something that I set out to do, I guess, specifically. But I guess since I was a kid, I always wanted to work in the role-playing game industry. I think, Tim, what you were saying, I think a lot of us never thought that was even a thing, like to even make a living out of it just seemed impossible. And to be honest, I thought role-playing games were going to die off. Like, I felt they were going the same direction as people that like model trains. Like, it was just going to effectively be a bit of a dead-end hobby.
I thought that too. Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, like, 8 years ago, it just completely changed. Everything changed. And now there's never been a better time to go into the industry. It's crazy how exciting it is. So yeah, I think
it is very cool.
It's amazing. I love connecting with a whole bunch of new generation players, and just because I just remember the excitement I had when I was getting into it at their age, and just thinking it's still a thing now is pretty amazing. In terms of lessons learned.
My apologies. I have to duck out. Thank
Okay.
you.
See you, Stacy. But yeah, I'm going to wrap up as well. But in terms of lessons learned, I thought, Tim, you covered things off really well. Pretty much most of what I was going to say, you kind of covered off. I think for me, one of the biggest things is completion. It's so easy to talk about doing stuff, and it's so hard to finish it. And I think Tim's advice around starting small the key thing is most of us only learn and get better. And this can be artwork, it can be making a game, anything, writing. You only get better by doing it and doing it a lot. And so the trick is the more you learn, you've got to learn from your failures, basically. If you don't learn, then you just keep failing. So it's a waste of time. But as long as you continually keep to learn and be open to constructive criticism and be open to looking at your work and trying to lift your game, as long as you're kind of always trying to push yourself forward, the trick is to just, constantly keep completing something, even if it's not perfect, and then picking up and moving on to the next thing. Because the secret part of it is that you may not be completely successful in your individual business opportunities, your own product aspirations or game aspirations, and it might be a failure. You might produce it and it might not sell many copies. But the interesting thing is the industry and people in those bigger companies, they really respect people that complete because they know how hard it is. And so I think sometimes just going through that process will often prove you to other companies that you might end up working for rather than necessarily doing your own sort of IP stuff. So it's an interesting one. So I think don't be put off by failure. Just work through it, and sooner or later, hopefully, you'll get a great success. I think that's the trick. Alrighty.
Cool. Well, thank you, everyone. This is the end. If you guys want to remind everyone who you are, and if you want to plug anything, now's the time. And we've got a contest going on in the Twitch chat as well.
Cool. So I'm Paul Tobin. I'm from Chaosium Games. The only plug I do have is that Chaosium is coming to New Zealand. We've got a dedicated convention in Wellington. It's better get the dates right. It is November 21 to 22. It's in Te Papa, and we are going to there is going to be kind of like an industry aspect to the 2 days because we want to sort of get people in who are interested in the industry, not just Chaosium Games. So hopefully I'll see you guys there. And thanks again for having me. And great questions, Matt. You nailed it, mate.
Oh, thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was fun. Thanks, everyone. My name is Tim Denee, and I make games under Old Dog Games. Don't really have anything to plug right now, but you can follow me on Blue Sky, olddog.games, website's olddog.games, got a newsletter. Cheers.
Cool. And Stacy Longstreet had to leave to go to a meeting. I'm Matthew Wills, and that's it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, folks.
Cool. See you later.
My pleasure. Take care. Bye-bye.
Done.